Welcome to the third and final episode in a Legendarium series about the life of Henry the Young King. In Part 3, A Dance of Death, we will talk about how Henry the Young King kept the peace with his father, Henry II, until 1182, when he saw another chance to rebel. By 1177, at the age of 22, Henry the Young King, firstborn son to Henry II of England, had a title and an inheritance in waiting, but little else. His wife Margaret became pregnant that year, but tragically she gave birth prematurely on June 19, 1177. Their son, named William, died only 3 days later. The couple had no more children, taken by many at the time as a bad omen. They were not wrong. Through the Christmas court of 1177, he remained at his father's side, likely because his father did not trust him to be on his own. For the next 5 years, there are few records of the young king's activities, so it would be fair to assume he did nothing to disturb his father's peace. On August 15, 1179, King Louis VII grew ill and believed he was not long for this world. So he decided to crown his 14-year-old son, Philip Augustus, as king, and despite his illness, King Louis traveled on a pilgrimage to the tomb of Thomas Becket. The king would be cured of his illness, another miracle credited to the murdered archbishop. Nonetheless, King Louis VII died a year later on August 28, 1180, and the new king, Philip Augustus, promised to support any of the sons of Henry II if they rebelled against their overmighty father. At the Christmas court of 1182, Henry II demanded that Princes Geoffrey and Richard do homage to their elder brother, Henry the Young King. Richard protested, insisting himself to be sole heir of his mother's beloved Duchy of Aquitaine. Young Henry, urged on by French troubadours who were overfond of war, claimed that the lords of Poitiers and Aquitaine had asked him to depose Richard because of his many cruelties and reign as their duke. While the old king sent agents to judge the truth of young Henry's claims, the young king sent his wife to Paris to solicit help from Philip Augustus. An overly enthusiastic troubadour in young Henry's entourage composed a ballad about the conspiracy, complete with the names of the participants, and this tipped off King Henry II about the plot against his throne. Once more, Henry the Young King had to flee his father's presence and took refuge in the castle of Aix-sur-Vienne. King Henry and Prince Richard surrounded the castle, taking a bridge to prevent soldiers loyal to Philip Augustus from arriving and helping the young king. Young Henry grew desperate, resorting to robbing civilians within the castle to pay his troops. In time, young Henry even sank to robbing churches, monasteries, and even the shrine of Roquemadour. So, when the young king fell ill with dysentery on May 25, 1183, a great many people saw it as divine punishment for terrible sins. By the time the Bishop of Cahors tracked down young Henry, he was already preparing himself for death. He confessed his many sins, took communion, and begged to be reconciled with his father before death. King Henry II suspected a ruse, so he simply sent a valuable ring once owned by King Henry I. Young Henry took the gift, prayed for forgiveness, and dictated a letter to his father asking him to forgive the barons who had joined his uprising. When young Henry died on June 11, 1183, he was clutching the ring that his father gave him. And when Henry II learned of his son's death, he was despondent. He is said to have said, "He cost me much, but I wish he had lived to cost me more." Since most of the young king's supporters were afraid to show themselves, his funeral was a sorry sight. Only a few knights accompanied the hearse, and they had to sell their horses for food. After the knights disemboweled his corpse to prevent rot, the Bishop of Limoges refused permission for the entrails to be buried in holy ground because the young king was a looter of churches, and his body remained concealed in a mausoleum until his father was able to retrieve him and give him a proper funeral. The death of young Henry cleared the way for his younger brothers Richard the Lionheart and John Lackland to inherit the throne. Yet what sort of king would young Henry have been if he lived to be King Henry III? Though popular as a sponsor of tournaments and court poets, he repeatedly showed himself to be inept in war and politics. It seems unlikely that a King Henry III could have prevented the collapse of the Angevin Empire in France, which of course happened under his younger brother John, who took the throne 13 years after his elder brother's death. That wraps things up for this Legendarium series. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, press like. If you want to see more, press subscribe. And if you've got anything to say, let me know in the comments section. Thanks again for joining me, and I hope that you have a great rest of the day.